Welcome to the CoSN Podcast, bringing you timely insights and strategies to succeed in the ever-evolving world of school system technology. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. Each month, you'll hear from Consortium for School Networking experts, visionary technology leaders, entrepreneurs, and practitioners who will discuss the topics most essential to every school and district technology leader. And now, enjoy today's episode. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be focusing on cybersecurity considerations during COVID-19. It seems to be a very timely topic and one that we want to be thinking about in education and putting my parent hat on, even as being a parent, to think about ways in which we can keep our young people safe during this unconventional time, maybe is the best way to put that. This CoSN Podcast is now incorporating in Amy McLaughlin. She's CoSN Cybersecurity Project Director, and Tom Ashley, CTO and Director of Technology at Huntington County Community School Corporation in Indiana. Welcome, Amy and Tom. Tom, I want to start with you from the district level. Tell me what the last couple of weeks have been like for you. And I would imagine that no matter sort of how extensive your history is in education and technology, it's pretty hard to dive into the sort of the well of experience to understand maybe what to prepare for. And how to approach what we're entering into. Is that fair, or do you feel better prepared than I would imagine?
Well, it's interesting. We have been distance learning, e-learning, remote learning now for several years, and a couple of this is the end of our second full year. And so a lot of it sort of feels like that. So we've had a lot of the pieces in place, which has really been helpful. We've been actually able to have a lot of the instructional pieces continue on as we have less and less staff on site and in place. And so we've been able to maintain professional development support. We've been able to maintain technical support. And now we're entering into a new phase where, starting tomorrow, we really have to be out of the buildings. And so that just is another layer of distance from our faculty and staff and students. But I think, being prepared is absolutely a key. Now, again, as like quote from John Wooden way back in the day said, when an opportunity or a need hits, it's too late to prepare. So in some cases, it's, if you're prepared and you're able, and that's one of the goals, is to try to keep things as normal as possible. But these are unprecedented times, and we're learning as we go. And it surely has helped that we had a lot of those pieces in place already.
Now, I would imagine that, the system has experienced extensive pressure that it either wasn't designed for or it just hadn't experienced up until this point, even though you've been in this sort of environment for a number of years. Has it revealed any blind spots or sort of leaks in the system that you're now having to catch up and support?
Yeah, one of the biggest concerns is the number of remote users, for sure. And a lot of our administrators and other key staff members are using VPNs into our network. And so on a cybersecurity perspective, that can potentially leave a pretty big vulnerability if they're doing things or their computer has access, since you're basically drilling a hole into your network. And so we actually had a school district relatively close to us have a ransomware attack based on that exact scenario. Is something that it happened a few weeks before we started getting locked down with COVID. And so we started looking at some of those practices, and we reached out to them. They were going to present at an upcoming CTO clinic, but we'll have to wait to hear their full story on that. But yeah, I think the number of remote users and all of those possible VPNs connecting inside the network is something that is a big concern to us.
Amy, tell me a little bit about CoSN Cybersecurity Project Directory and how you're looking to support members in this, like we said, sort of uncharted waters that we're in.
Well, one of the challenges is that when you work with a lot of school districts across the country is everybody's at a different starting point. So what we're trying to do is provide resources that help districts ramp up and think about where they are in their cybersecurity journey. There's no right or wrong place to be. It really is just where are you and where do you need to go. So the resources that we're putting out, both ongoing but also right now during COVID, are really designed to raise those questions of, have you thought about this? Do you have a plan, and how are you going to go forward? In a very short, because we know educators don't have a ton of time on their hands to read a book, which is ironic, but I know people are just pedal to the metal, working really hard. So we try to keep everything short, usable, and practical, not uber techy, uber detailed, so that people can just get a grasp and start moving.
Amy, when we think about these resources, is there consideration or discussion around sort of the final recipient of that resource? I'll give you an example. So I'm a parent. I have 2 young kids that are now at home, learning from yours truly and my wife. And when we're talking about security, are you looking at resources that a Tom Ashley can then somehow communicate to teachers in the district, and that somehow gets communicated down the chain to a parent? Because, like, as an example, we signed in to the district portal today, and I know, Tom, this might bring shivers to you. Signed into the portal, and there are codes that my son needs, my first grader, and he has some knowledge of these, and I'm thinking, well, I'm also using this for my 5-year-old. That's not the intended purpose, but how do we, I want to be mindful of that from the district perspective, and I'm trying to understand the language of resource. And is it that we have to go a step further and think about, the mom or dad or caregiver that is then going to receive something from a Tom Ashley or somebody like Tom in his department, so that we understand what we need to do?
Absolutely. I think one of the key points or the key challenges of this particular situation is equity. Just like school districts aren't all starting from the same starting point, the families who are in your situation at home with their students are also not starting from the same starting point. I'm also the director of the Smart Education Network by Design initiative for CoSN. And, one of the things we've been pushing on for a very long time, and in my former role as the state E-rate coordinator, was a huge piece for me, was getting equitable internet access out to schools, districts, and recognizing that homework gap of how to support families who are lower income or rural, don't have access. So those kind of cracks in our process are really showing right now. So when we talk about the resources that we put out to districts, we're also including those components of think about who your audience is and how you meet them where they are. Because for some, and this sounds kind of odd from a technical driven organization, but for some districts, the best resource is going to be, what can I do with my paper, pencil, crayons approach, as opposed to heavily online. Like if you are, I'll pick on my state, for example. In Oregon, we have some very rural school districts where, even the school has bandwidth that won't support a phone call and state testing at the same time. So when you look at situations like that, that access at home is going to be very limited. So how can we overcome that, and how do we help people in those situations? And that goes beyond the security component, more into the end user support. But from a security side as well, you have different starting points with people. I mean, as a parent, I am going to be super uber cautious about how we interact with online resources, but somebody else whose whole experience is through their iPhone and Facebook and doesn't use computing resources on a regular basis is going to have a very different starting point for how to stay safe in that environment. So yes, definitely we're encouraging people to consider those elements, and also to think about things like, this is your opportunity to provide some really simple home end user training, digital citizenship to students and parents.
You're listening to the CoSN Podcast, produced in partnership with MindRocket Media Group. If you're a K-12 EdTech leader, product or service provider, or a school or district leader looking for support with your communications, public relations, social media, and multimedia production efforts, visit mindrocketmediagroup.com to learn how you can work together with the expert team at MindRocket to achieve your goals. Tom, let's talk a little bit about these the portals at the school level, because now they're being seen as a bit of a life raft for parents that are jumping in. The kids have an understanding of what's there, what they can utilize, but we've lost that. There's a gap in facilitation as to sort of what can we use and what order, like what makes sense, right? It's like we have a bunch of ingredients, but we don't know the meal that we need to make. And I think that one thing that I would imagine could be challenging from a cybersecurity is that if frustration tolerance is low, which I think is expected in kind of what we're all going through, if a parent is struggling within that student portal that they've gained access through their child, they're going to be tempted to jump onto these other platforms because everybody's throwing up a website. Everybody's doing something live from a learning perspective, and they're using all kinds of platforms that I would imagine, keep you up at night. How should we look at that? Because if I jump from a portal and I'm diving into Facebook to watch something at a zoo, and I'm jumping back in, and then we're going into it just seems like it gets to be untenable at some point in time.
Well, I think, and you're a good point, and Amy made a few good points as well relating to this, is I think that, it's been such a blessing to have everyone out, in the world basically offering free services. And that's, a really good thing from one perspective, but it's also super challenging to try to even consider ramping up a new platform, as you mentioned, a new platform or new technology or new ways to log into things. Because, my best recommendation is you got to try to keep your operations as normal and as possible for your end users, because it's very easy. They are, as Amy mentioned earlier, they're all at different levels of knowledge and access. And a couple simple things I say, keep it simple, try to keep it as normal as possible. We've extended our district Wi-Fi I put outdoor access points within a week of us knowing that we're shutting down, so students and families can actually go to the front of our buildings and access their normal Wi-Fi with all their normal stuff connects really well, regardless of, even my home internet right now is struggling because of probably oversubscribed users, and everyone's working remote. So I think the best advice is keep it as simple as possible. If you really do have an instructional hole and need to expand your services a little bit, do it judiciously. Don't, try to implement every free thing that's out there being offered. You just have to be very, very flexible. You have to be monitoring it all the time. And we continue to support. We're pretty much 100% remote now, but we have phone. I basically set up the phone system where someone dials my extension, it comes to my cell phone. And so all of my texts and all of our PD are on the same type of situation. So I took a phone call from a parent in the grocery store today. And so we are still providing that support, but to keep it simple, keep it usable. And I think those are some of the best things we can try to do. And there's free stuff is great. And maybe some of it makes sense. We use some security tools that they offered for free to expand some of that VPN protections and some of our desktop protections. We're gonna use that, and we've used Zoom. They've eliminated some of the limitations on the use of that tool, and so our teachers and students are using those tools. So some things you can implement into your plan. But don't try to implement all the great free stuff. Sometimes it's a curse to have too many great free stuff.
Amy, when we think about sort of the backside of this, and when we get through this, I would imagine that there are going to be, some things that are going to be broken, right? And Tom and his contemporaries are going to be, sort of in cleanup mode because accidentally things are going to be, from a security breach perspective. And we're going to learn a lot about our habits. When you think about resources and supporting, CoSN members in this regard and some of these questions that you can maybe already forecast will be coming, how do you think about that from a professional learning perspective so that it is going to be a different world, right? Our expectation of sort of, what potentially is a certain level of a breach or not, and how to approach that and how to address that and work backwards. How do you think about that next generation, I guess, of PD?
Well, I think that this is going to be an interesting, on the backside, what we're going to see is we'll have seen a lot of opportunity and a lot of challenge. And I think that what's going to come out of this is a lot more awareness of the downsides. I think Tom brought up some good points about, for example, using free things. And, part of that, what we're going to discover is whether people ask the right questions or not about using free tools. Some of those tools you have to be careful because they may be collecting your student data. So I think we're going to see on the backside a resurgence of this conversation about how do you evaluate a tool, and recognizing that we're going to have to add that to how not just technical staff and TOSAs, who's on special assignment or whatever your flavor of that is, do that evaluation, but how teachers add that to their pedagogy. And how teachers are more engaged, and even down to how education schools train teachers for a new world. Because I think what we're going to find out of this is that privacy and how you interact in an online environment will be hot topics that we're going to be putting. I know from a CoSN perspective, we'll be putting resources out to say, let's evaluate some case studies of what went well, what didn't go well, and how we can move forward. But I think that this is going to be a broader conversation just across education.
Tom, I want to close with this. I would imagine, obviously, this is a brand new world for you. You're having to, change the way in which you operate and communicate. You're in a grocery store communicating to support. You've got, all these different systems sort of up and running in different configurations. Is there a way, or is it too much to expect that those in your position around the country are also documenting sort of the lessons going forward, so that preparedness, almost like a fire drill in the future, that we can be in a spot where, because there are districts that have not been in essence online for 4 years, to your point, right? And so they're probably really scrambling. How do we look at preparedness so that the Tom Ashleys of the world in 5 years feel that not only is their PD sort of been running in lockstep with what sort of the world is putting at our feet from a challenge perspective, but that you feel prepared as a professional, and that then trickles down into the operations of the district?
No, it's a great question. That was actually some of my final notes to talk about as well. I'm also the co-chair of the Indiana Cybersecurity Task Force. And one of our goals is, as it's sponsored by the Indiana Department of Education, and one of our goals, as mentioned earlier, is that there's so many resources, especially related to cybersecurity, that sometimes districts with all sorts of different types of level of resources have a challenging time trying to pick the right tools and the right directions to go. So we focus on that as well. We focus on looking at all those tools and working with all sorts of corporate companies that work in security in the security industry, and we try to sort of create simple things that school districts can do. And so I think the other point that you brought up is, if you haven't had a disaster recovery plan up to this point, this is surely giving you all of the information you need to create one moving forward. And so I think when we are coming out of this situation, that I think it's going to be really important to be reflective and spend a lot of time reviewing and looking back what went well, what needs to be improved on, document it, reflect on it, get a lot of input and feedback, and then you'll have your plan moving forward. So if you haven't had a plan up to this point, if you do it the right way and document well, you'll have one surely by the end of it.
Well, wonderful items to consider for everybody in the audience. I want to thank Amy McLaughlin, CoSN's Cybersecurity Project Director, and Tom Ashley, CTO and Director of Tech at Huntington County Community School Corporation in Indiana. You've been listening to CoSN's discussion on cybersecurity considerations during COVID-19. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. Thank you for listening to this episode of the CoSN Podcast. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast apps. You can also listen to each new episode on edcircuit.com or CoSN.org. Follow @CoSN on Twitter for further updates.